How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? Today, we're going to be creating a Superman composition inside of Photoshop directly with these assets. I have an asset folder in the description. If you want to follow along, you can go download it and put yourself in there if you want as well. Most of these tutorials on my channel are going to be me doing things for the very first time as well. So considering that, and I'm not a tutorial professional or have any experience posting tutorials online, don't expect the best quality out of it, but I do hope to give you guys inspiration for your own project. My goal is to make these a regular, and I hope you guys enjoy. So to get started, we're going to go ahead and throw in a cloud background. I used AI to make one because after scouring the internet, I didn't find anything that was high enough quality and that was good enough. We're going to go ahead and make some changes to it in the camera raw filter. So after you open up the camera raw filter, what we're going to do is make the image a little bit bleaker and a little bit smoother. So turning up the exposure a little bit, turn down the texture all the way. I want the image to be very smooth. I want it to look flawless, if that makes any sense as far as the details go. I played around with the rest of the light settings. But other than that, you can kind of do what you want with this. Make it look however you want. I'm showing you guys what some settings look like, but you can copy mine right here if you want. So moving on to the next part, it's going to be kind of self-explanatory, but we're going to want to cut out our figure. We're going to want to cut out our individual. I did object selection tool. When you do try to select something with the object selection tool, sometimes it can only select certain parts of the image. To select your whole figure, kind of hover on the outside of the figure and it should select the whole figure for you. Just how I figured out how to do it because I was having some issues with it. Now we're going to want to refine our hair in the mask. So I went into selected mask at the top. We're going to want to press refine hair. It didn't really do much for me, so I'm going to have to go in with a brush and do all this manually. But for you, it may be easier. Depends on the figure and what their hairstyle is. But this is a big part. You do want to spend some time making sure the mask, specifically of the hair, is basically flawless and is perfect because we're using lighting and using all different types of effects. It's going to end up taking a toll on the image quality if your hair is just a brick on top of your head and there's no real volume or definity. So it was kind of easy. It took me a second, but I got all my hair defined and I think I like how it turned out. The rest of this process was just cleaning up my body, cleaning up the little artifacts that didn't need to be there, making sure everything was clean. And that's a crucial step when creating a composition is making sure the mask is clean. You'll thank yourself in the end. Now, after doing some finishing touches, I actually decided to go back and do something a little bit unique for my situation. I wanted to add that little curl that Clark Kent infamously has on his forehead. And to do that, I took the raw image. I simply cut out a curl with the selection tool. I spent some time again on the hair, making sure that this looked as natural as possible, making sure the mask was realistic, and also making sure the curl looked like it could fit somewhere on my forehead. So here I went ahead and duplicated the curl. I wanted it to be a little bit longer and hang a little bit lower. So I duplicated it. I put it down where it would match the other curl's curve pattern. Again, I did a little bit of blending to make sure that all this looked good. I also used the puppet warp tool in the edit tab to kind of move the curl where I wanted it to be exactly. Now that the individual has been masked perfectly, it's time to work on the details, specifically the blemishes and marks. No matter how clear someone's skin was in the first place, I was always going to do post-processing and clean up the skin and make it look bright, similar to the background. That's kind of the theme of this whole composition. So I used the blemish tool, went in and basically did my entire face. Considering our body was going to be covered up by the suit, I didn't worry about it. After taking some time to make sure I was blemish free, we're going to head into the camera raw filter again. Now that we're in the camera raw filter, the goal is bright skin, smooth details, turning the texture down a little bit to get that very smooth effect, turning up the exposure just a notch, turning up the clarity to match out those texture details because those do get turned down a little bit. The definition goes down when you turn on the texture, and basically messing with it until you think it'll match your background pretty well. Everyone's picture is different and everyone's gonna have different lighting, different views, different angles, whatever. So just match it to your best ability. If you need to go back and forth, save your camera raw filter, go see how it fits into the background and save your previous effect. And then you can go back into the camera raw filter, apply that effect and touch up there, do the same process. Now that we have our background set, our character masked out, and our character ready to be composed into our scene, the next step is we're gonna head over to Topaz Gigapixel AI for upscaling the Superman suit. Now for you guys, for the individuals that don't have Topaz, you can look online. There's plenty of free options for AI upscaling. This is just what I use, or in the description with the file asset folder, I included the upscaled image of the Superman suit. So after fiddling with it for a minute, seeing what looks good, trying different effects, I went ahead and just saved it as a PNG, And now we're going to be hopping back into Photoshop. So once we have our Superman suit PNG, this process is going to take a minute as well. We're going to clean it up. We're going to make sure it looks very good, and we're going to get the proportions right. So after scaling up my body to my liking, I import the Superman suit. And the first thing I do is cut off the cape on the right side using the object selection tool. It did miss a bit of the cape under the left arm, so I had to go back with the mask, but that's okay because we have to go back with the mask anyways. After going back with the mask and cleaning it all up, I made sure everything was looking really clean. Then I went into the puppet warp tool and started warping it similar to my proportions. I definitely don't have as broad shoulders as this man, so I couldn't just slap it on my body. I had to scale it to about my size and height, and then I used the puppet warp tool, like I said, to scale the shoulders and arms down just a little bit. I also used the puppet warp tool to match the arm extension. I did also scale it widthwise just a tiny bit to make it a little bit easier to match just because his upper body is so wide. One thing I did was, because my left arm was actually behind my body in the picture I took, I had to separate his arm from the body and make a new layer because of that, so I could put it behind and the lighting would match up. So if yours isn't like that, simply just cut it and leave it as is. But because my arm was behind my body, I wanted to give that same effect, and I think it looked cool in the end. Now that our Superman suit has been masked and placed into position, it's time, you guessed it, to go back into the camera raw filter. Very similar process as the other two times you've been in here. Color grade it how you want. It's really up to you creatively how you want this to look, but I went with the same smooth, high exposure look that I did with the other two assets. After getting everything just right, I had to save this as a preset so I could put it on the left arm. And after doing that, I went ahead and cleaned up. And after that, I went ahead and cleaned up the rest of the cape around my neck area, around areas that need to be cleaned up after I was in good position. And this is where it gets a little bit fun, is the lighting. So now we get to add our shadows and add our highlights. Now, when I first started using Photoshop, I always wanted to make compositions. I didn't know they were called compositions, but I wanted to blend images together and make them, you know, appear like they were one. The most important thing I would say is probably color grading, but the second to that, or first, debatable by some, would be highlights and shadows. Your figure cannot be put into a world where the light is not congruent with its surroundings. Therefore, adding shadows is extremely important, and adding highlights is even more important. Wherever the light is coming from in your background, you're going to want to use that as a reference. This was kind of hard for me to understand when I was first getting into Photoshop and learning how to add lighting to images, and I'm by no means close to that good at it. I think I'm pretty intermediate to novice still, but I understand that the lighting being on the left side of the screen means that the highlights will be on the left. The highlights are the points where you're going to add the light, and the right side, or where the light is not going to be on the image, is where the shadows are going to be, basically. Easiest way to do this is to add another layer for different types of shadows and highlights. So when you add a layer in Photoshop, a brand new layer, this layer, you can put, I think, anything in this layer, but you can draw on this layer most importantly. And you want to create it as a clipping mask, so that way it clips to your figure. That way your drawing, aka your shadows and highlights, are only masked to the figure and do not go on your canvas. How I tend to do it is, I will set my brush to something like 50 to 70, specifically for shadows, as I'm gonna tell you. You're gonna wanna use black, or depending on the lighting situation, a very faint color close to black of whatever you're using. Meaning if I was in an ocean scenario, if I was out on the ocean and doing a composition for like some sort of harbor or a boat, I maybe would use a very, very dark navy as a shadow. Same thing with the highlights. If your light is a very bright yellow color, similar to the clouds here, you're going to want to use a white, then go over and change your hue to an orangish yellow and just barely turn it up just a tiny bit to get that saturation. And you're going to want to paint multiple layers of shadows, multiple layers of highlights, meaning you're going to want to paint sharp ones, you're going to want to paint very broad, feathery ones, and you're going to want to paint ones in the middle. You're going to want to paint all kinds of shadows to see what looks good. You can definitely name them so you have a better idea, but each layer will be its own type of shadow, its own type of highlight. That way you can go back and change the opacity of, say, the very harsh lights that you put on the edges of your image. Or if you want to change the color of your very broad shadows, you can do that very easily instead of having to redo everything or repaint over something. And so when you're adding lighting for your figures, you're going to want to separate these into groups. And what I mean is, you're going to want to add clipping mask for your figure, aka your person, and then you're going to want to do it for your suit as well. You're going to want to do this differently for every single object in your scene, regardless of what composition you're creating, because you're going to want to give each and every individual object a different highlight, a different shadow at different perspectives, right? Because That's just how lighting is. It's different everywhere. It can depend on the reflectivity of an object, and it can depend on the roughness of an object. It can depend on how many lights are in the scene, what color the light is. That's why you're going to want to create a mask for each and every object. And you can create as many masks for each object as you want. You can literally, the sky's the limit. You can make 50 shadows individually. You can make 50 highlights individually. It's completely up to how many you want and how detailed you want to be with it. So here, as you can see, I'm painting on some neck shadows. I'm painting on some more face shadows. I'm painting on a few shadows on the actual Superman suit. And one thing I do is actually paint on some of the same red, very feathery, on the right side of the cape, because it's so bright. It's kind of too much brightness for that. It doesn't really make sense. Well, my neck would be completely dark and then that would be completely lit up from that side. What I chose to do is take the eyedropper tool, get the same red for the same type of areas, very feathery, low opacity, and kind of go with the mask on, of course, and paint over that area to make it a little less highlighty and to make the highlights dimmer. Now what I'm doing is I'm adding some highlights, as you can see, to the right side and then to the left, just adding big streaks of low opacity, white drawing paint, whatever you want to call it, marker, whatever it is. I'm painting it on and just do what looks good. Change the opacity, play with the smoothness, play with the hardness. Obviously, for harsher highlights and lighting, you're going to want to turn the opacity up and the hardness down. But it's literally up to you. It depends on where the light is at and what the situation is. Sometimes the opacity needs to be higher and the hardness needs to be lower. And I'm also here adding in some shadows on the right side, just some darker shadows of where the creases are at, are a little bit darker up towards the bicep area. I'm keeping it a little more mellow because that's where more light is peeking in at. And I'm also adding highlights to the shoulder, kind of just making everything blend into the lighting scenario. And now we're going to be adding in some of our lighting assets, some of the flares, some of the sun-styled stars that you can set these blending modes to lighten or screen. And we're literally just going to add these assets in how you want. I put them on the left side of the screen. I tested kind of the sun in the corner. I tested it behind my head to see how that looked. It didn't really make sense, so I ended up changing that. I added in some light leak on the left side with an asset. I added in flares to go over my body to kind of give that three-dimensional feel, which is very important. Also, the cloud was kind of an important part. I did get these assets from texturelabs.com, so please go check them out. And making this three-dimensional is really important. So with the cloud, I put the cloud in front of my body and I turned the opacity down just a tad bit and I played with how it looked. I put lighting behind me, just play with everything until it all kind of comes together. And here I actually did something kind of cool with this. I did something cool with two assets, which you'll see. I scaled this down. This is kind of like this streaky, motiony, blurry thing. And it's like a background. And I ended up fitting this perfectly in the background. I think it looks amazing as it is. But what I did after this is I took this asset, I duplicated it, and I went ahead and modified it, distorted it a little bit to make it look like there was a curve of streaks going upside behind me. And I think this added to the effect of me being in the air a lot, like me flying, genuinely like me being in motion. It kind of sold that effect a little bit better than if it was just the background, especially in the movie. That's kind of the effect they went with in the poster. If you see, like, that's kind of, so I wanted to imitate that effect to a degree. And I feel like I pulled it off here pretty well. Now here, I'm doing some touch-ups. I'm simply going back and rethinking some of the lighting scenario now that it's very bright, adding some highlights where they should be added on the suit, adding highlights on myself, adding shadows where they need to be added, just touching everything up, making sure everything looks clean and congruent with the background. As I said earlier, it's very important that the lighting is on point. Even this, I don't think I did that good of a job on the lighting. I do have a lot to work on, especially with like ambient spaces like this. It's a lot easier with other projects I've done as far as direct lighting, where you just have one light and it's like very obvious where to put the highlights and you can't mess it up. But with something like this, it's a lot more broad. There's a lot more ambient lighting, so it's a little bit more difficult to kind of hone in on exactly where to get it. But you see here, I'm adding highlights to the side of my face, which is very important. I'm adding them with a brush that has a less hardness and less opacity. And I'm going back and cleaning up the areas that shouldn't have any highlights with about the same hardness brush, about the same opacity. Now here I was working on my curl again. I was wanting to add a shadow and highlight to it. The easiest way I found to do that was to duplicate the curl, add an inner shadow with about the same color I wanted the highlights to be, and then paint in a shadow under that. And honestly, after that, that's pretty much it. You could call it here. I think it looks great. As someone like me, I like to go back and add and see what looks good. So in future projects, I know what I can and can't do, or what looks good or what looks bad. For you guys in particular, if you are a beginner, if you are a complete novice with adding shadows and highlights, I would recommend going and watching some of these videos. These videos helped me figure out where to start, what to do. Here, as you can see, I'm adding, just being my perfectionist self I am. I'm trying to add every little thing that really doesn't even matter, but I did it anyways. And, you know, adding the rest of the assets as well, the effects. I also added some little sparkles just because I felt like doing that. Just doing the little things to see what looks good, adding highlights where I think, broader highlights, and finishing everything up, making sure it looks congruent and fluid. But other than that, I think that's what we're gonna call it now. This is my very first video. The tutorials will get better. I promise you, I will be more in depth. I will be doing live tutorials, and I will make sure you individuals that are watching will get the best content out of me. I appreciate all of you for watching. Train hard.